who would like to share a greeting before we embark on the panel. Antoinette?
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me, Maggie? Yes, okay. So as Maggie said, I bring greetings from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is the home to Humanities Without Walls. As you probably know, we're a 16-partner consortium of universities across the greater Midwest, from Penn State to the University of Nebraska and beyond. I am a historian here at the University of Illinois. I'm director of the Humanities Research Institute and the faculty lead for Humanities Without Walls, which is entering its 7th year as a leader in national and international conversations about the work of the humanities, both in and outside the academy in our rapidly changing world. I'm joined from the HWW team today by Associate Director of HWW, Peggy Brennan, Maggie, of course, Associate Director of Career Diversity at Marquette, and Ben Lindsay, who's the Project Manager of Diversity also at Marquette. And because I'm speaking to you from East Central Illinois and from the University of Illinois, I want to note that here at HRI, we respectfully acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These nations were forcefully removed from their traditional territories, and these lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As humanists, we recognize that the past is not past and that no field or arena of inquiry is exempt from the responsibility of addressing the legacies of settler colonialism and its contemporary manifestations well beyond acknowledgement such as this. So what I'm saying is a demonstration of our ongoing commitment to supporting the work of Indigenous scholars and communities so that together we're able to envision what Joy Harjo, the Muskogee Creek and Cherokee poet, calls a map to the next world. And if you'd like to hear more about how we support Indigenous scholars and scholarship at Illinois, please let me know. I'd love to talk with you about it. Meanwhile, I thank you all for joining us for this panel and information session. HWW is funded generously by the Mellon Foundation, which supports the work of so many humanities faculty and students, and which has enabled us to think about new ways of flourishing and reimagining what the impact of humanities and arts-based thinking and practice can and should be. While Mellon has always been focused on social change and the public good, its current president, Elizabeth Alexander, has led the foundation more expressly toward a full-on commitment to social justice and racial equity by design. At HWW, we also take these questions seriously, and in our career diversity efforts, we are continually striving to think about how to structure our approaches with these issues top of mind. As our name suggests, the humanities should be without walls. That is to say, welcoming to all, alive to the porous boundaries between the academy and the world, and committed to helping humanists determine how best to move their work and the institutions they inhabit toward that boundless horizon. Our career diversity workshops at HWW, which we ran in Chicago for 5 consecutive summers, virtually in 2021 during the pandemic, and in 2022 were hosted by our consortium partner at the University of Michigan. Our workshops have been designed to do just that, to equip PhD students in the humanities and arts to think about their graduate training as a launching pad for a variety of professional pathways, from the academy to nonprofits to government work to education and the public arts. We've graduated over 200 alums who form a network of connections and expertise across the globe, 3 of whom are here today to share their experiences on the panel and to tell us how what they learned helped them get to where they are now. Our summer workshops have been run as hands-on experiences, bringing leaders from a variety of employment sectors to talk about their own career pathways with a cohort of doctoral students in the humanities and related fields. We've hosted speakers who have helped students to craft resumes and manage their social media presence, to think about how to conduct informational interviews with people whose jobs align with their interests, and to develop skills and habits of mind that will equip them for academic employment or for careers beyond the academy. And in the summer of 2023, HWW, with our partners at the University of Minnesota, is hosting the 8th Career Diversity Workshop, and there will be information about that at the end of today's session. So Maggie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Antoinette. It is my privilege to introduce you to the 3 distinguished HWW Fellowship alums participating with us during today's panel. We believe their experiences of the workshop career stories, and development post-workshop offer key insights into some of the scenarios graduate students who earn PhDs in the humanities will face post-graduation. We believe their stories offer all of us a chance to reflect on our own journeys, including thinking through our values, career ethics, and engaging in work which we each find meaningful or energizing. Above all, the HWW workshop experience provided hope to me when I was a fellow in 2017. Hope that I might be able to take some agency in the construction of my career, that I wasn't a failure if I decided not to pursue a tenure track job, and that ultimately empowered me to take the skills, tools, and strategies I learned back home to my city and my university. I hope that our panelists today inspire you to begin this process, to consider applying for the HWW Fellowship, and to reflect upon the broad application of your training and research expertise in the world. Each panelist will speak for about 5 to 10 minutes, sharing their stories, strategies, and post-workshop experiences. We will then have a chance to directly engage in a Q&A with the panelists, with questions drawn from you submitted to our team through a shared Google Drive document. As you have questions, please feel free to type them into the Google Doc and affix your name at the end of the question so we can call on you to ask the question of the panelists directly. Ben and Bridget, my colleagues from Humanities Without Walls, are moderating that document and will share the link in the chat. If you have any additional questions that we can't address during the panel, please feel free to contact us. Our first panelist today is Brandon Render. Brandon is an assistant professor in the history department at the University of Utah. His teaching and research examines 20th century US history, post-1945 social and intellectual movements, and the Black intellectual tradition. His current book project, Colorblind University, A History of Racial Inequity in Higher Education, explores the fundamental shift in Americans' collective interpretation of race during the Civil Rights and Black Power era. Brandon was selected as an HWW Fellow in 2021. So everyone, please help me welcome Brandon.
Thank you for that intro, Maggie, and thank you again for inviting me to speak about my experiences, both as it relates to the HWW workshop, but then also how I took that experience with me afterwards onto the job market and now into my position as an assistant professor at the University of Utah. So I finished my PhD at the University of Texas this past May, transitioned to this position in July. And one of the things about this particular workshop is that it helped me both on the job market, but then it's also already helped me as an assistant professor as well. And so even though I just started in July, I've only lived in Salt Lake since the end of July, and so a couple months now. I'm already using those skills that I developed through the Humanities Without Walls workshop. And so I'll get to those in just a moment. But basically, I just want to talk about two larger aspects of the workshop that have helped me. And so the first is my approach to the job market, what my experience is like. And then the next is how the HWW workshop has helped me become a better scholar and teacher, and also mentor. So when it comes to the job market, I took an approach where it was just everything that was an open position was on the job market for me. I was actually applying for jobs last summer during the Humanities Without Walls workshop. And so I applied for jobs, not just tenure track positions, but also positions in administration work in higher education, but then also jobs in nonprofit work as well, because that's what my background is in. That's what I worked in between my degrees, both my bachelor's and master's, and then my master's to my PhD. And so one of the interesting aspects about this workshop is that it really sort of opened my eyes up to different career opportunities, some of which I'd actually already closed myself off to. And so one example of that is that being a graduate student at the University of Texas, there's a consulting firm. Some of you might know this firm, some of you might not. I'm not going to name it now because I don't want to give the workshop a bad reputation or relationship to this particular firm, but it had a negative perception on the University of Texas campus because they would partner with people that sort of did work that put people in ethical dilemmas, but at the same time, they also paid really well. And so there were some cases where people might not believe in the work that they were doing with this consulting firm, but they still took the job anyways because they needed the money. They wanted the job after they finished their degree. And so for me, this sort of put a negative light on all of consulting work. But then during this workshop, we actually got to meet with people who, similar to my situation, were historians, had a PhD in history, but then went into consulting work. And so they talked about their process of finding that job, either after they finished their PhD or sometimes during their graduate studies. But then also how they were still able to use those skills within their profession that they developed, not just through the Humanities Without Walls workshop, but also in connection to their PhD. So it still felt like they were getting value out of their work as well. And so, you know, this helped me think about consulting in a different light, but then I even thought about this as a potential career opportunity for me as well. And so at that point in time, I was a member of the American Historical Association, and there's a program through the AHA called Career Contacts, which would put you in touch with somebody in specific career fields. In some cases, you know, you could meet with them one-on-one. They would answer any questions that you might have. And so I looked into this more. I looked into consulting more as a potential career opportunity. But then right after that, I went on to the job market. Fortunately, this position here at the University of Utah worked out, and it's been great ever since. And so for me, the job market was both jobs within academia. I only applied for tenure track positions, and also jobs outside of academia. So it could be nonprofit work or in some cases consulting. Whenever I actually did go onto the job market for tenure track positions, I had a number of interviews. I think I interviewed for about half of the jobs that I applied for. And I think in just about every interview, I actually mentioned the Humanities Without Walls workshop because it was so integral, not just because I had just done it, you know, a couple of weeks before the interview or a couple months before the interview, but it was so integral to the way that I was thinking about my future career, either in academia or even outside of academia. And so it was one of the things that really helped me sort of frame my approach to not just teaching and scholarship, but also mentorship as well. And so one of the interesting things too is that Humanities Without Walls is starting to gain a larger reputation across the United States. And so there are some people that were already familiar with the work that the consortium is doing. And so it's good to have that connection as well. But then also like this, the workshop doesn't end once, you know, the 2 weeks is over. You have opportunities to continue contributing, giving back in various ways. And so it's one of those things where you're not just a fellow for 2 weeks. You're sort of a fellow throughout your entire career. And that's another one of the benefits. And so now I kind of want to shift gears to discussing about or talking about what it is the Humanities Without Walls workshop did to help prepare me for this position. And so, like I said, I feel like it's made me a better teacher and scholar. And so it's helped me in the classroom and creating a more equitable and inclusive classroom. It could be very practical things, like the year that I was involved with the workshop, there's another fellow that mentioned how they had trouble reading certain fonts. And so now anytime I even craft my syllabus, I think about more conscious about how I'm using font choices or fonts on the syllabus to make sure that it's accessible to everybody and so that everyone can read it. And so it's small little sort of practical things like that that might make a difference to, you know, just individual students, but it's also larger sort of goals that I've created whenever I go into the classroom as well. And so, for example, one of the things that I like to do is make sure that students can contribute in their own way. And so whether that's talking specifically about whatever it is that I've had them read for that week or bringing in their own personal experiences. And so yesterday we had a great discussion in my African American history class about sort of the different terminology that we use to refer to Black Americans. So, you know, is it African American? Is it Black? Do we use people of color? And so it was great because it gave people the opportunity to use their own personal experiences and bring that into the classroom. But it's sort of an indirect skill that I was able to develop through the Humanities Without Walls workshop. And so it's made me a better teacher. It's sort of framed my approach to the classroom. but it's also made me a better mentor as well. And so even though I just got here, I'm formally mentoring one student who's working on a capstone project in the history department. But then I'm also working informally with 3 other students who are in a professional historian course, working on research projects that are closely related to my own interests. And so working with the Humanities Without Walls workshop has given me the opportunity to take those skills that I've developed that we either talked about directly within the workshop or that we had the opportunity to develop in some sort of indirect way throughout the 3 weeks that I was in the workshop. It's 2 weeks now, to use that to become a more effective mentor. And so I actually had a discussion with the student that I was formally mentoring, or that I am formally mentoring. I was talking to her one day. I said, I'm comfortable with, your project and taking on this role, but I just want to make sure that I'm able to help you out the best that I can, and that we can maximize this opportunity and this working relationship that we develop as we work on this project together, and as you complete this final project for your capstone. And so one of the things that I've been able to draw on is that experience with this workshop to help me develop those skills that I've been able to use already in the position, even though I've only been here for a couple of months. And so again, this is a workshop that even just in this 1 year span of being on the job market for 4 or 5 months back in the fall and winter of late 2021, early 2022, and then being in this position here as an assistant professor in the history department has really helped me, to sort of frame the way that I approach my work. Not just whenever it comes to what I'm doing here in my office, whenever I'm working on research, what I'm doing in the classroom, but then also how I'm helping expand students' opportunities here in the history department as well, because here at the University of Utah, we have a pretty big emphasis on public history. And so most students, graduate students, whether they're working on master's degrees or PhDs, typically go into public history fields. And so I'd say when the time comes, that it hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure that it will pretty soon, whenever I work with graduate students, that I'll be able to continue using the Humanities Without Walls workshop in that work as well. And so, like I said before, working with not just Maggie and Antoinette, but everybody within the workshop, the cohort that you develop, it's something that lasts beyond that couple of weeks that you're all together, working with different people in the day-to-day, sort of flow of the workshop. But then even afterwards, I know that a lot of people still stay in touch. Last year, I was on the University of Illinois campus, and I got lunch with Antoinette and Peggy one day. I got to meet with Ben one day whenever I was on fellowship at Marquette's campus. And so, these are relationships that you're able to cultivate, not just within the course of the workshop, but over a longer period of time. But then also the skills that you develop will be helpful no matter which career path you choose. So I'll send it back over to you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And next time you're in Milwaukee, we have to go get lunch, because I couldn't go to that lunch, which I'm deeply saddened about. Okay, so keep moving on. Our second alum is a member of my 2017 cohort. So to Brandon's point, staying in touch and the friendships that you develop during the workshop experience is something that's been so meaningful to me. And I think Caroline will talk a little bit about that as well. Caroline is a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University, where she completed her PhD in 2021 with a dissertation focusing on the early modern history of the English Channel. Her work lies at a nexus of various histories, including those of cartography, geography, marine politics, and the blue humanities. Her work has been supported by the Huntington Library, Royal Museums Greenwich, the British Library, and Harley Fellowship in the History of Cartography, and the New York Public Library. She has served as a graduate leader of the History and Action Program, on the Graduate and Early Career Committee of the American Historical Association. She's a member of HWW's Fellowship Cohort in 2017, and she is currently serving on HWW's Alum Advisory Board. She is available on Twitter at the handle @CasMaris and is an editor at H Maritime. Thank you for joining us today, Caroline, and welcome back to Humanities Without Walls.
Thank you, Maggie, and it's always a pleasure. Like you said, just the opportunities we've had not only to communicate digitally over the last 5 years. But, you know, we were able to spend an AHA conference together and meet up with folks who were part of our cohort in New York City, in central New Jersey, where I live. Yeah, it's one of the great joys, I think, the continuing joys of the workshop. And yes, so just to mention, I'm at Columbia at the moment, but I'm speaking to you today from central New Jersey. I wanted to acknowledge my place on the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape people. And so my sort of contribution to this panel today is going to be a little bit more on sort of the personal and I want to say almost psychological aspects of the workshop. You know, I'm not no psychiatrist, but there's an awful lot of sort of mental work and sort of mental changes, I think, which can happen or at least that I saw happen, that I felt happen personally at HWW. And there was actually a great quote I saw recently in an article for those of us who might be participating who are gamers. There was an article on NBC about a week ago about Dungeons and Dragons, and I love this quote from a current wonderful game master named Abria Iyengar, where she was talking about, you know, sort of the process of playing D&D and being with friends in this creative activity. And she said, D&D isn't therapy, but it is therapeutic. And similarly, I would say HWW is not trauma recovery or therapy for young scholars, but it is incredibly therapeutic. And some of the ways in which this is the case, I was thinking about, and again, this is going to sound perhaps a little slightly off the wall, but I was thinking about all the times that we had folks in our 2017 cohort, which was the first national cohort, the first cohort to bring people to HWW from around the country, not just within the consortium. And the number of times people, many of us, cried during the course of the 3-week workshop. People cried on the first day, and everyone cried on the first day, and then people cried on subsequent days. And every single time people had an emotional reaction to the content and the practice of the workshop, I think it was for different reasons. The first was for the relief of feeling safe in the space of HWW with fellow graduate students who are going through similar struggles. Crying from fear of the future, absolutely, because it is a really rough sort of job market, certainly in academia, that is presented to us. Crying from the relief of the workshop giving you the tools to face that fear of the future, honestly. Crying from the release that comes from acknowledging you want more than what academia has to offer in many cases. And certainly if fellows were coming from institutions that were not at all friendly to the idea of career diversity, HWW is an enormously welcoming space for those who might, you know, this might be the first time that you can experience this sort of this camaraderie and this learning. Releasing guilt over the idea that, like you mentioned, Maggie, you know, releasing quote unquote guilt over quote unquote failure, right? According to the expectations that might have been laid on you when you were a first-year graduate student. The relief of refocusing your choices and your agency on yourself rather than on others or the expectations of a program that we apparently were all supposed to sell our souls up to, right? And recognizing that that choice is not a selfish choice, right? It's your life. And the workshop reminded us that we have life choices to make that will go beyond the 5, 6, 7 years you're going to spend chasing this piece of paper that says you are a smart person, right? And finally, coming back to the first point, sort of the joy of making new friends in a world which often, I think, discourages that, you know, through competition between graduate students, competition within subfields, siloed scholarship, limited collaboration, and so on. At the end of the day, in terms of thinking about my own personal journey, you know, there's a lot I could say about my intellectual journey. And I say all of this as all of these, you know, quite transformative things that the workshop did for me. I say this as someone who came into the workshop actually already in a pretty good place. when it comes to career diversity, because I had the fortune of an experience at Columbia of being a graduate student coordinator for the History in Action program, which was one of the first sort of pilot programs run by the Mellon Foundation, or funded by the Mellon Foundation and the American Historical Association, from 2013-ish, 2014 through 2017. So I had already immersed myself in this material for a year before coming to HWW. And I am somebody who, just the course of my life has made me, over the last 5 years, including, of course, during the pandemic, has made very clear that there are life choices I have had to make, which have nothing to do with my life as a scholar, but they're equally as important. And that's a really, honestly, it's a easy thing to lose track of, honestly, when especially when you're in coursework, and then you have to race to the prospectus, and then you have to race to ABD and orals, and then et cetera, et cetera. I am a mother, right, of 2-year-old twins. My husband also has a PhD, but he has a steady job. He got his job through meeting someone at the career diversity fair we held at Columbia. I know this can work, okay? So I have at least that really positive evidence in my life. This summer, we suddenly became homeowners. We are tied to a certain extent to where we live. I have to consider where my children are going to start elementary school in a few years. Now, one way to react to sort of life, quote unquote, encroaching on your academic work, one way to react to this is to think that our choices have narrowed. And instead, thanks to HWW and the other work I have done in this area, I can look at the life I have now and see it not as circumscribed, but as stable and settled, right? And joyful. And my son is downstairs with a high fever right now, so we're probably not going to sleep tonight, but I have him, right? And I have pictures of me writing my dissertation while frantically rocking his little baby chair next to me last year, right? These things can coexist. HWW and the lessons we learn there, it's not even necessarily about making choices which take you away from academia. And this is a really important point. This is not a workshop about Plan B. Plenty of us have ended up in TT. Brandon is in a tenure track position a year after being in the workshop. It is not an exit strategy. It's about becoming a better scholar in the way you want to choose to be a scholar, right, in the world. And at the end of the day, one of the experiences I had while I was working for the American Historical Association, I was a graduate student member of an advisory committee there, essentially. And I had a late stage grad student, she was finishing and she was going to be on the market, come up to me. And, I didn't know her, personally, I got to know her a little bit. This extraordinarily intelligent, woman was standing there in front of me, vibrating with anxiety. I could see her shaking because she was standing at a major annual conference in her field, about to finish, and there were no TT jobs for her in her field, in her subfield. Nobody should have to feel that way. Okay, just nobody should have to feel that way. And it's part of it is obviously the story of the disintegration of academia as an industry, but nobody should have to feel that way in any industry, right? So HWW provides. I recognize that a lot of this, this can sound vague. This can sound feel-goody. I hope I don't sound too much like, another wellness email from your graduate school, right? I don't want to say, rebrand yourself and become something different. But what HWW is about being offered an amazing, just sort of buffet of tools, of opportunities, of ideas, and the support of generous people. And taking all of this in, then you get to mold those resources into what you need for your own reasons to do your work and to make sure at the end of the day, it's your life. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I just wanted to share that Caroline and I were so committed to this idea of our friendship and attending conferences together that we actually created a hashtag at the AHA in 2020, right before the pandemic when it was in New York City, and we referred to ourselves as hashtag conference buddies. So even like little things like that, to think that, you know, grad students can really develop these meaningful non-competitive relationships, I think has been so critical to me. I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, please feel free to throw them into the Google Doc that Ben and Bridget and Peggy have been sharing in the chat. If you want to wait to ask, we'll also probably use the hand raise feature once we get to the Q&A. Okay, now I have the great privilege to introduce you to Harshit Rathi, who is currently a PhD candidate in comparative studies in discourse and society at the University of Minnesota, which is our workshop partner this year in helping to design, facilitate, and run this year's workshop. In addition to working on his dissertation, Harshit is a technical writer for Medtronic, a global producer of medical devices and therapies at the forefront of innovation in medical technology and the healthcare sector. I've also heard that he has some good news in relation to his position there, which I won't spoil it, and I will let Harshit describe that for us. Harshit was an HWW Fellow in 2021, and I'm so thrilled that he is able to join us to talk about his workshop experience and maybe share a little bit about the Twin Cities for those of you interested in joining us this summer. So Harshit?
Sure. So you'll see from my background, there's the Stone Arch Bridge. Hopefully, for those of you who get to attend the workshop, you'll visit and see the Twin Cities in the summer are actually worth visiting, even though frost warning's already around here. However, so okay, so thank you for inviting me, Maggie, Antoinette, Peggy, Ben, and also for my great co-panelists, Caroline and Brandon covered pretty much the significant chunk of what I was going to touch upon, and I completely echo what they've said. I'll just add a few more sort of data points or things about my trajectory, which has been kind of moving outside academia into the private sector. And surprisingly, I come from a very kind of activisty organizing background where I was like, oh my God, these evil organizations and their evil corporate for-profit structures. The organization I work for now has been like the least toxic time I've had in my 10 years in Minneapolis, and super supportive, awesome colleagues who actually have interesting lives and hobbies, and they have well-rounded, exciting things they do. People teach at the organization I'm at. You can teach courses, there's reading groups, there's podcasts, discussions, there's all kinds of things happening. So surprisingly, it wasn't as terrible as I had assumed from the outside before joining. So I'll describe. I see some really good questions in the chat, so I'll try and incorporate some of that too in what I'm describing. So I'm in this kind of like, so I'm a ABD PhD candidate in a theoretical humanities department, which is highly kind of Euro theory focused with some diversity stuff thrown in for fun, right? Diversity objects, Euro theory. I'm an international student, so the market's extremely narrow as well. So it's a tight fit, so to speak. And I work on comedy and humor, which you can imagine, academia, comedy, humor, it's a great selling project. So in some ways, for me, it was a choice of trying to figure out, like, do I want to follow my passion and do the research and writing that I want to do? Or do I want to instrumentalize and reverse engineer my project based on the trends of the market, right? And right now we see whatever recent insert political event or tragedy followed by what the job market will privilege, right? So for me, it was more making a choice of trying to work on the thing that I actually want to work with, which was why I was in graduate school, rather than trying to have this, the sword of the job market hanging over my head the whole time. So one of the amazing things about the HWW workshop, even though I had the privilege and pleasure of attending it during the pandemic, and it was all virtual, was that it's sort of, in addition to the kind of therapeutic aspects that Caroline mentioned and the mentoring aspects and the skills that Brandon mentioned, was also just like actually having activities and tasks that you were asked to do that basically are extremely useful and crucial, but they sort of get glossed over in our graduate training, often. So one of the things that I remember distinctly was speaking with an alum of our our anthropology PhD program, who works in the Twin Cities, and doing an informational interview with him about his role at another company that he worked for. And, you know, it was just the small act of going out and like getting a meal or getting a coffee with someone who's, you know, out there doing interesting things or other things, where it's not the usual doom and gloom over academia and the market and, you know, the usual grad student routine that everyone gets into, where it's the same conversation ad infinitum. So I think just having that conversation and seeing it from a fresh perspective or different angle was extremely rejuvenating, in addition to all the things that we see, you know, that are valuable, let's say, in staying in higher ed and academia, right? So it was just a kind of fresh perspective in that way. So I applied to, you know, higher ed admin jobs, there's nonprofit jobs and other kinds of positions. And then it you know, I ended up where I ended up, and I'm joining a cybersecurity firm of all things next week. So it's like a endpoint protection cloud cybersecurity firm. I know it sounds kind of strange and out of place when you know, based on my background and the training that I have, but you know, there's immense opportunities to actually apply your skills and your knowledge and your training and bring it to fore in different ways, right? For example, being an international student, you know, I am aware of how global English works. So I can actually, for example, I'll give you a small example. The organization I work for now is the world's largest manufacturer of medical devices. So I work on their therapy delivery system. So I work on cardiac pacemakers, leads, and catheters. And it's a highly regulated industry. And you actually see like interesting responses from people whose lives were actually saved by these devices. And I write some of the procedures or like some of the manuals for the devices that basically are implanted to people's bodies. So it's kind of interesting, high stakes stuff in a very different way, even though it's you know, it's not as direct and immediate as seeing a student's face light up or mentoring someone or something that is much more within your bounds as an instructor or a teacher or a scholar. But there's something about, you know, hearing patient testimonies or learning that someone, you know, had someone, a physician had halfway around the world, had someone cut open on an operating table and actually called to clarify like what was being written in a manual. You know, that's a different kind of pressure or interesting feeling to feel like your work is meaningful and connected and actually has value in the world. So I can speak more about that. There are some great, you know, and I'll just speak a little bit about the Twin Cities. You know, don't visit in the winter, but other than that, it's an awesome place to be in terms of, you know, it's a affordable, decent, great city. You know, there's plenty of jobs. Minnesota is one of the best labor markets in the country. So who knows, you might end up being here. There's lots of jobs and opportunities in, you know, edtech, tech, medtech, fintech, pharma, biotech, name it. So there's a lot of opportunities here across the board for humanists. You know, you can really put your skills at, you know, you can market yourself in different ways, whether it's a project manager or someone who can do admin work or someone who can bring creative, you know, methods or processes or ways of thinking to bear upon existing problems. And you'd be surprised, people are, you know, even in a highly regulated industry, people are quite flexible and open to different ways of thinking. So it's not very straitjacketed in the way where you're not going to end up being some kind of drone at your job, even though parts of it will be boring and repetitive like any other. You know, anyone who's written a syllabus for the nth time can say the same. But I am seeing that we only have 20 minutes, so I'll pause there and we can address anything I've missed in the Q&A. So thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Harshit. There are a lot of great winter sports in the upper Midwest. So I will say, you know, that's the part of the Midwest that I do love, even though it is cold. Okay, so I'm going to open this up to our Q&A, and I'm looking in the Google document that we created, and we've got some great questions. Well, there are no names attached to it, so I'm just going to dive in and read the question. And if there is a question that you want to ask directly, we would ask to put, you know, have you use the raise hand function, and we can call your name that way as well. But I think one of the questions that I think is really important in the Google Drive document is, could the alumni give any advice on the application process? And that might be a great way for us to talk about the two-stage process that is required for applying to the HWW fellowship as well. So does anyone want to talk a little bit about the application process or any advice and tips that you might have on that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. Yeah, so whenever I tell everybody that I enjoyed everything about this workshop, that also includes writing the application. And that might sound weird, but at the same time, you know, you're writing all these sort of formulaic documents describing your project and people are just picking it apart. And instead with this, it kind of gave me the opportunity to talk about the work that I've done in the past, either related to academia or outside of academia, and then connect it to the philosophy of the Humanities Without Walls Consortium. But then also taking that information that while I was writing the application that I'd planned or expected to learn during the workshop, how I plan to bring that back to my campus, or how I plan to use that beyond the 3-week period of the workshop. And so what I would recommend that you do, this is a highly personal document, but it's a great way for you to sort of take inventory of what it is that you've done in the past. Sort of equity and inclusion work could be directly focused on things that you've done before, kind of like what Caroline did with the program that she worked with during her graduate studies. But it also could be things that you've done outside of academia as well. And then you could talk about how those experiences have prepared you to take part in the Humanities Without Walls workshop, but then how this workshop will help you build on the skills and knowledge that you've gained during your graduate experience and what you plan to do with that in the future. And so it's kind of like what most people recommend that you do for an interview. Talk about what it is that you've done before or what it is that you're doing now, and then talk about what it is that you plan to do during the workshop and then after the workshop, and how you plan to use those skills and knowledge.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Caroline or Harshit, do you have any thoughts about that?
Sure, I can jump in, and I also have the list of questions up here. So I thought that I might add something on another topic as well, if that's okay. That one of the threads I see, or that to my answer, which would fit a bunch of questions, and I think also address Brandon's comment there too, is that one of the things I hope that you, I think that an applicant should probably hope to demonstrate in your application is that you have an open mind to things. And I don't mean that in sort of a facile, like I should say that I'm up for anything so they'll let me in. Like it is very much, it's an important part of the mindset, I would say, really, because when you show up at HWW, you are going to be, exposed to many perhaps opportunities that you've heard of, but then you're going to get deeper into sort of how those positions work. But then you're also going to hear from all sorts of people who you didn't even know that their job description existed, right? And that you might find yourself really intrigued by, or that you might end up finding yourself thinking about work that you never would have thought about doing. I think this speaks to, Brandon's anecdote about, having a negative opinion of one consulting firm does not mean that you can't find the consulting firm that's right for you, right? And so, and part of the joy of being at the workshop too with, people from across the humanities is the person next to you, either for personal reasons or for scholarly reasons, is going to be interested in completely different things from you, even if you can have a high level, similar, you can speak to each other as scholars, as people. They might be completely different from you, and you understand these new models. And I just wanted to maybe sort of extend that to speak briefly about one of the questions was about sort of how the workshop is structured day to day. And I think that keeping an open mind through that whole process is definitely a really important part of that, because I don't know necessarily how the workshop will be structured this year, but in 2017, I'd say that there are sort of 3 phases. Like the first few days is when like I said, we all have breakdowns and we try to figure out like what's important to us in our lives. We did exercises determining our values, both as just just in general, and as academics, like, would we move to middle of nowhere for a TT job? What salary do we want? You know, in determining these important questions. So there's sort of like the first phase is about just throwing yourself open to possibilities and figuring out what it is you want. The second phase is the exploratory phase, where we were going to a different place. For that year, it was in Chicago, every day, meeting people doing really interesting work, understanding what sort of opportunities were out there. And then I'd say the third phase is about putting what you've learned, starting to put it into practice. Practicing dissecting a job ad and creating a CV for it, and a resume, and then a one-page resume, and then you know, how do you cold email people for informational interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So I imagine that a lot of pieces of that, they might be differently arranged, but you know, that's sort of my remembrance of the various steps that HWW could take you through. You know, there will probably be different people running the exercises than we had 5 years ago, but yeah. And Maggie, you can speak more to that, obviously.
Sure. No, thank you so much for that, Caroline. You know, things have shifted, and we'll be launching into the design stage of this year's workshop. But I certainly think that a few of the methods that we really prioritize are this values discernment, thinking about how your identity and what you find meaningful in the work that you do as scholars can connect to your career exploration, and then also constructing a series of site visits, and also helping you think through informational interviews. If you don't know what an informational interview is right now, that's okay. I didn't know when I joined the workshop in 2017, but that's one of the things that we really try to instill through the workshop. Harshit, do you have any thoughts? I saw you nodding at informational interviews, and so
Yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think Brandon and Caroline covered mostly what I would have added, but I'll just say one more thing also in response to question number 3 about like people who want to work beyond academic jobs. How does this help you translate your skill set? So, you know, and I'll let Maggie comment on the structure for this year, but for my year, the structure was it was actually quite helpful because we basically worked on like sector by sector. So in addition to also learning about opportunities and hearing from people's stories who've done interesting, creative, different things with people who have PhDs who are not in academia or are doing jobs adjacent to academia, say publishing or libraries, or, you know, say I'm still a writer at the end of the day, even though I might not be, you know, but like the department I work in has a lot of PhDs as well who are from the humanities, typically English or writing. So there's definitely, you know, specific workshops during the like mini workshops or breakouts during the workshop itself, which helped me at least find ways to update my resume, make it more market friendly, make it more competitive, offer skills for things that, you know, I mean, we're multidimensional people, right? So we want to show or highlight each aspect of our career or resume in different sectors or places, right? So I'm not going to front load all the fellowships I've received for a non-academic resume, for example, that might not be relevant or even useful to have in there. So things like that, right? Decisions, having a cohort of people you can talk to, friends you'll make, people you'll talk to who are in the same boat as you are, and you can talk, you know, very frankly and openly with them. It's a very supportive and helpful environment to be in. So I would definitely say that yes, it helps you translate your skills, helps you translate experiences, helps you market yourself in different sectors, and there'll be people who you can talk to who are working in those sectors too. And, you know, if anyone wants to talk to me, I'm happy and available as a resource too.
Thanks, Harshit. I do see one question in relation to in the Google document in relation to the stage. Or what stage in your PhD should you be if you're interested in applying for the fellowship and the workshop? I would say any stage. HWW, I think at any point, I mean, I really believe in the idea that you need to start thinking about the broad application of your career and what that means on day 1 of your PhD. So if you're a first-year PhD student, please feel free to apply. If you're at the end stage of your PhD and you're finishing your dissertation and you're on the job market, please feel free to apply. I don't think we make any kind of discrimination to what stage you're at in the PhD, and I think it's always of value because it's not so much that you're going to leave the workshop and we can say to you, you're going to find a job because you attended the workshop. No. Instead, what it is, it's about methods. It's about a toolkit that we hope to provide to you, not just for your first post-PhD position, but for all the transitions that will come into the future. And I think Harshit's experience right now is a great example of that, right? Started out as a technical writer for Medtronic and is now going into another position with a cybersecurity firm. So those transitions will continue to happen even after you receive your first placement. So it's about the methods. So please feel free to apply no matter the stage that you're in. Okay, I want to go back to the Google Doc, and I also see that there's an eager chat happening. And please feel free to email. I see that Harshit and Caroline have placed their email addresses into the chat, so please feel free to email them or us with any questions. I'm going back to the chat. I'm just looking to see if anyone has affixed their names. I don't see that yet. So I'm going to go to this question that I think might be really applicable for our team at Minnesota if they feel, not to put y'all on the spot, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to see you and hear you a little bit. Will there be opportunities to work with Indigenous faculty members, mentors, or presenters at the University of Minnesota? So Minnesota team, I know we're going to be really designing deep into this when we meet next week, but I don't know if you wanted to say anything or share some thoughts about that question. If not.
Yeah, would you like me to take this, or do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can go ahead and begin, and then you can follow up, Mackenzie. I think that's a wonderful. We are known for our focus on Indigenous studies and American Indian studies, so we will definitely try bring that to the workshop. We have not selected the candidates or the speakers, so this is a really good opportunity for you all to recommend areas of inquiry that you want us to focus on. So this is a good opportunity if you put it in the Google Doc. We'd appreciate that.
I think it's also good for us. Go ahead, Mackenzie. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Oh, no, I was just saying I'm not sure I have much to add to that. I mean, we definitely have some, not know firsthand, obviously, about some of the research we have here, so I'm sure we'll be incorporating that. But again, we are open to suggestions about what people are interested in and
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the Google Doc. I see. Let me see. Here's a great question. For those of you who have worked or plan to work outside beyond academic jobs, how does the HWW workshop help translate the value of your dissertation research in new professional contexts? So I wonder, I'll throw that out to the alums, and I can also tackle that as well. But Caroline, I see you nodding. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'd just say that absolutely the technical skills of, I think it was a full day we had in 2017 where we were guided through steps of dissecting job ads and thinking about how to present our materials for various positions. And, again, that might sound really basic, but you may well be in a position at your institution where even that sort of basic training is not available to you. That happens to a lot of people. And it's really just thinking about it like an academic would think about it. It's really just learning to use another language or another sort of set of terminology where you figure out what it is an employer might want, and then you tailor yourself to them. I mean, it's a job market, right? We're all living in late stage capitalism here. You want the job, we're going to play by certain rules. And I've applied to, before I started this postdoc, I was applying to, I think I applied to up to 40 positions, which were, all academic adjacent. They were academic publishing, academic administration. I made it to several final rounds of interviews. And did have an offer, which I decided not to take because it was only a year and I wanted more stability than that for my family, right? Even though it was going to be a ridiculous amount of money. I didn't have the security of knowing that would translate to anything longer, so I didn't take it. It's HWW is both about learning how to format your resume and trying to figure out in my head, what values am I going back to when I'm trying to make the decision about whether to take this one-year job, right?
Maggie, I might be able to say a little bit about that question too.
Sure,
if you
Antoinette, go ahead.
We really work hard in HWW on the career diversity side to encourage you as part of your discernment and other forms of value reflection to think about what brought you to your dissertation work in the first place, what it is that you content-wise have learned about, early modern cosmologies, African-American history, forms of relationship between literature and art, and to think through that substance, that intellectual, ethical, political substance toward what it is you want to do for your work in the world. And that may end up being an academic job, but it may also be, consulting work. It may be museum practice. It may be art education in a high school. Who knows? It might, but really to remain in touch, in taste and feel with what brought you into the work so that you carry the knowledge, the skills, the methods, but also the intellectual substance and scholarly substance of what brought you there in the first place.
We're getting close to time, and many of us have hard cutoffs at 4 p.m. So I do want to wrap things up really quickly, or at least start to begin that wrap up phase. I would also say, just in my own experience of that last question, I think one of the hurdles that PhD students really face when they read job ads for careers beyond the academy often get hung up at this idea that we just don't have the experience that employers are seeking when they write those job descriptions. And I think what's so great about the workshop is that we bring in experts who help to demystify that process and empower you to feel, yes, I have the experience, I have the knowledge, and I have the skill sets that these employers are seeking. It's really a matter of how we frame our experience and our skill sets and what we can bring to the world, both within and beyond the academy. I want to say a very hearty thank you to Brandon Render, Caroline Maris, and to Harshdeep Rathi for joining us and for sharing your lessons and reflections on the workshop experience. We also want to say thank you to our colleagues from the University of Minnesota, Vianette Castellanos, Mackenzie Sullivan, Maria Hoffman, and Jennifer Kaufman for joining us and for collaborating with us this year on the design of the workshop. I can't wait to join you all in Minneapolis in the July of 2023. And if any of you have questions about the application process for the fellowship workshop, please email us. We're here to answer your questions, and I hope you really do consider applying for the workshop this year. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.